I do not enjoy photo editing. I just thought I'd put that out there up front because I'm sure you'll be thinking at multiple points in this video that the solution to my problems is just to edit my photos more often. I usually do POV photography videos on this channel, but to me, there's nothing more relevant in gear discussion than the actual results you get from the camera, whether good or bad. So while I discuss the switch, this video will just be showing photos taken in these last 6 months, and they're all straight out of camera JPEGs. I guess to start though, I should let you know what camera I made the switch from. Up until December 2024, my main camera was the Lumix GX85, which I paired exclusively with the 20mm f1.7 lens. An amazing compact setup, and I still love it, as it was the camera that got me back into photography on my trip to Japan in early 2024, which I'll make a video about soon. But I still have it, and I will likely never sell it. I really only say I switched because I just locked it away for 6 months to really give Fuji a run. In fact, there are going to be some upcoming videos on this channel where I'm using it for my photo walks. Despite that, there is of course a main reason that I ended up buying the Fujifilm X-T2, which could probably be boiled down to gas. I am not a professional, and I'm not going to pretend to care about all the technical stuff like the megapixel count. I'm not pixel peeping, and I barely noticed the jump from 16 megapixels for my purposes, as I rarely crop, and I've actually printed photos from the 16 megapixel sensor and have been satisfied. So this video is not a video where I'm going to be dunking on Micro Four Thirds, because I still enjoy that format, and shout out to all the Micro Four Thirds shooters. All of that is to say, if I ever buy something with more megapixels than the X-T2 down the line, I promise you that it wasn't the deciding factor. And generally, this video won't be a video about specs. I'm sure there are a ton out there if you're looking for a rundown of that kind. The real reason I switched to Fujifilm, and I'm sure many can relate, is to shoot with straight out of camera recipes. I'm currently on the journey to find my color photography, and after so much time debating it, I bit the bullet on the X-T2, hoping that it would be the answer. And if you're wondering why I went with the X-T2, I just really wasn't willing to spend on anything newer given the Fuji inflation, and I read great things about the X-Trans 3 sensor. Now, I fully acknowledge that simulations and recipes are a form of editing, and that I'm allowing the camera to make those edits. I just personally don't enjoy sitting at the computer and messing with sliders and stuff. If you do, I really respect that. Your end results are probably way better than mine, and maybe that switch will flip for me someday, but for now at least, I prefer to spend that time shooting. And by the way, this isn't a video specifically about the recipes I've been using, but if anyone wants a video on my go-to favorite recipes, I can do that as well. I know it could be silly to buy into the hype just for straight out of camera colors, but it was that in combination with the actual body of the camera that sold me, which I'll get to later. After my Japan trip, I started a photography Instagram account, @KinderCaptures if you're interested, and started posting photos quite regularly. By the end of 2024, after posting for almost a year, the big realization I had was that I wasn't posting any of the color photos from my GX85. Not that they were bad, because the GX85 does have great color rendition, I just never preferred them to my black and white photos. I loved the straight out of camera black and white photos from the L monochrome profile, but when it came to posting color, I realized I had been leaning toward the photos I took out of my mom's old Fuji Digicam, funnily enough. However, to be honest, if Panasonic somehow made those Lumix LUTs from the newer cameras backwards compatible, it might be game over. In my 6 months using Fuji, I've messed around with quite a few recipes, and though not all have been to my liking, I have found a few that work for me in different situations. And that's the key word, situation. The main thing with Fuji recipes you see online is that most of them are very situational and only get the result you thought you'd get in specific lighting or weather conditions. So make sure you do a lot of research on that so you don't get baited. On that note, I've realized that most of the recipes I like online that I could imagine being a true all-rounder look are based on the nostalgic negative simulation, which is on way newer models than my X-T2, but I still have gotten color shots that I love with more situational recipes. And honestly, that alone has made the switch worth it. I've actually been posting color photos that I take with the X-T2 straight out of camera. That was my goal, and it was successful in that sense. But my question after these 6 months trying to discover my color photography is, do I even need to shoot in color? Maybe that's a question for another video, because I could go on about the dilemma for some time, but it's something I've been asking myself more and more. And that's mainly because, ironically, my most used recipe on the X-T2 is a black and white recipe. And because I like it so much, if anything, I've been leaning further into black and white photography. So maybe the solution is just to sell it and stick with the GX85, which already has a black and white look I liked. But that does bring me to the other big reason why I switched to Fujifilm, the body. As I'm sure you've heard, most of the X series bodies have the physical ISO, shutter speed, and exposure compensation dial on top of the body. I didn't realize just how much I would, but I've fallen in love with the workflow of the dials, even though, admittedly, I have missed shots fumbling with them. Thankfully, since I'm not a professional, as annoying as it can be at times, I can afford to miss those shots because the trade-off of refamiliarizing myself with being actively aware of the exposure triangle has been really fun, and nostalgic even. And don't get me wrong, I'm not one to look down on auto modes. On my GX85, I just put it in aperture priority and let it rip, and I got results I liked too. I'm mostly mentioning the, say it with me, tactile experience for those that might be considering Fuji for that reason. Most of my fumbles on the X-T2 have been self-inflicted, as I have been leaning into a high ISO look for my black and white photography, as I think that noise adds some nice texture to those photos. That has forced me to be more aware of my other settings, especially if I suddenly want to go into slow shutter speed shooting, for example. But most of the time, I'm still using auto shutter speed or keeping my ISO just high enough for the dynamic range settings of any recipe I'm using. Now, the main downside to using Fuji that I often hear is the autofocus, but I have never shot autofocus on this camera, so I can't speak to that. The only reason I even justified the Fuji price was because I had decided that I wasn't going to buy any Fuji lenses. If I was going to dive into the physical experience, I wanted to return to manual focus, which I hadn't used in almost 10 years before I bought this camera. At first, I was considering getting a more affordable TT or 7 Artisans lens, but remembered that I already had some vintage lenses that got handed down to me, so I only needed to buy the body and an adapter. The lenses I've been using are the Pentax Super Multi-Coated Takumar 28mm f3.5 and Super-Takumar 55 f1.8, which were about 42 and 82.5 full frame equivalents respectively, and both have aperture rings, which I've missed a lot. I've also been using the K&F Concept M42 to Fujifilm X adapter, if you're looking for one. Not sponsored or anything, it's just worked for me. As a result of these body changes, I've slowed down a lot with my photography and gone back to using the viewfinder a lot more, whereas on my GX85 I use the LCD way more. I realized that I like the central viewfinder more than when it's on the left, which is part of why I went with an X-T body over an X Pro body. It's been nice to be more intentional with shots, almost as if I was shooting film. Of course, it's not quite on that level, but part of why I like film is the limitation that comes with only having so many shots. At least if you're like me and can't afford to shoot multiple rolls a day, or even a month. So I've kind of replicated that in my digital workflow, and have vastly reduced the amount of shots I end up with on any given walk. Maybe it's silly to not lean into the pretty much limitless shots I have with digital, but overall, I'd say I have a similar amount of keepers in the end. This has been great for me because similarly to how I don't enjoy editing, I don't like having a ton of shots of the same scene and having to make a decision between them, which is likely why I'm not a burst shooter either. Once again, no shade to you if you do that. You likely always get the shot somewhere in there if you go that route, but I prefer just trying to time it, and if I miss, I miss. Only recently have I started to mix in some faster paced shooting as I've gotten quicker with the manual focusing, both through the focus peaking assist feature and zone focus. Of course, I'm not perfect and I still miss shots, but the lens on my GX85, the 20mm f1.7, doesn't have the best autofocus anyway, and I miss shots too, so it hasn't been that much of a downgrade in that sense. I've even been trying to get into concert photography with this setup, which is wild because I bet when you think of a concert photographer in 2025, you probably don't think of Fujifilm or vintage lenses, much less both, but I got results I was really happy with at my first show. To wrap up this section, weirdly, if I were to leave Fujifilm, I think I'd miss the experience of the dials more than the recipes, which I didn't expect coming into it. However, I say that now, but if I spend time with my Lumix GX85 again, I might realize that I'm fine without the dials. Overall, I've enjoyed my X-T2 so far, and I don't plan to buy another camera anytime soon. So I guess in a way, you can say it cured my gas, at least for now. Full disclosure, that doesn't mean that I don't constantly research other cameras, because I too have a problem, but I'm never serious about pulling the trigger on any of them. To be honest, after not touching my GX85 for 6 months, that camera will feel like a new acquisition again, especially for being more incognito on the streets when hunting. Like I mentioned before, I'm definitely going to be using it again soon, now that I've successfully completed my 6 months really giving the X-T2 my attention. Weirdly, I didn't miss the autofocus once. I guess I just find manual focusing quite fun, but I do like the form factor of the GX85 in terms of convenience. Don't get me wrong, the X-T2 is a great size, pretty much perfect for my hands, but I still wouldn't use it with a wrist strap, and I'm definitely not fitting it into any of my pockets, especially not in the summer. The GX85 with the pancake lens can fit into bigger pockets, and as someone who tries their best to have a camera on me at all times, that's a big plus. Admittedly, there have been situations where I have my X-T2 in my bag when I'm headed somewhere, and even though I see a shot, I know by the time I get it out, the moment will be gone. As more time passes, I realize more and more about my own photography and process, like the fact that I may end up shooting 95% black and white one day, or that I really enjoy physical dials to control my settings. Only once I know that better will I know which camera is truly right for me, like a monochrome sensor camera for example. I've been thinking recently about what my dream camera would be and if it even exists, but I'll save that for another video. For now, I'm just going to keep shooting with what I have, because for all this talk about gear, none of it really matters more than actually putting in time on the streets. And with that being said, more POV street photography videos are on the way, so stay tuned. If you enjoyed the video, I'll be back with more soon. If you didn't, well thankfully, it's over. I appreciate you guys for watching. See you next time.